Y'all, please forgive me. I'm still waking up a little bit. Had just a little bit of a late night last night watching the presidential address. Before I get into a little bit of that, grab yourself a cup of coffee. My coffee's a little bit weak this morning. I've got to run to the store and get some more, but it'll do. Grab yourself a cup of coffee, a cup of hot tea, whatever your preference is, and we'll get started here in just a minute. So I'm not going to make the whole lesson today about the presidential address, but I think it would be wise for us to talk a little bit about it. And of course, we're going to place most of our emphasis this morning on the scriptures, but let's talk just a little bit about what we saw in the presidential address last night. I grabbed my laptop and made some notes, and boy, there was a lot. So, and I don't know. Look, I don't know if you're anything like me, and it takes you a little bit to really get going. But I'm trying to look over the notes just a little bit, brush the sleep off. Some of what President Biden, let me be respectful. Some of what he talked about last night talked about the climate crisis, talked about unions. So he's wanting more to do with unions, which I don't know how much y'all know about unions, but unions tend to be very left leaning and things like that. So, yeah, it's not really necessarily a good thing. I know he gets a lot of support from teachers' unions and things like that. Oh, let's see. Equal pay for women. I think that's great. And he said that we're going to spend a lot of money on research and development. Research and development of health stuff. Man, I've worked in banking for a while, and it seemed like we are always raising money for cancer research and things like that. And they still haven't found nothing. I'm just spitballing here, but seems like that's a bottomless pit. Some more highlights, and there's some specific stuff I want to read to you here in just a minute, but I'm just going to hit these other highlights. Mandatory 2 years of preschool, and then 2 years of free community college after high school. That's interesting. 12 weeks of paid medical and family leave. And it's interesting, he pointed out that white supremacy um, is terrorism, which if you've got any kind of an impression from me so far, um, I find white supremacy one of the most foolish ideas in the world, right along with black supremacy and any other supremacy. If you know anything about me, I believe in the supremacy of God. So, but the whole white supremacy being terrorism makes me wonder if that's going to lead to the oppression of white people. Because everything's being called racist nowadays. So if I disagree with you and I'm called racist, does that make me a white supremacist? It's kind of a blurry line there. Then we have the Equality Act, and he boldly proclaimed, all transgenders, your president has your back. Okay. By the way, he spoke very little on two topics. Actually, three topics that really could have used a lot more emphasis: the Equality Act, gun control, and voting. The Equality Act would be absolutely devastating to the country. I don't know how many of you have heard this or not, but there is talk, a lot of talk, about facilitating what's called rapid onset gender dysphoria. Now, in case you just grabbed your cup of coffee or need a little help with that, rapid onset gender dysphoria, in layman's terms, is, you know what, I've just decided that I'm a different gender. And they're talking about applying that in prisons to the extent that if a man has rapid onset gender dysphoria, then he is placed in detention with the women. Let's think about that for just a minute. How many men incarcerated for life? Now, we're not talking about honest, good, God-fearing folk. We're talking about criminals. How many men, or even women for that matter, that are set to be there for life would probably take advantage of that? Oh, I have rapid onset gender dysphoria. Put me with the women. Oh, I have rapid onset gender dysphoria. Put me with the men. Surely one can see a lot of problems with that. And with the voting, with HR 1, I'm just going to put this very simply. They want to um, basically change all the rules, all of them. Um, so there's that. But there's one quote from last night's message that I want to share with you. And I want you to really think about this, and then we're going to hit Proverbs chapter 10. I watched a little bit of Glenn Beck, his recap, his thoughts on the address last night. And uh, he happened, I was watching it on my phone, and he happened to bring up a picture of the quote from Biden, and I was able to snapshot it on my phone, which I'm very grateful for. So this is what Biden said, and I want you to think about this. And yeah, we'll have to sift through a little bit of um, gobbledygook. I'll just put it that way, gobbledygook. Um, but listen closely, okay? Grab your coffee, take a sip, listen closely. He said, and I really believe, because I've spoken with over, I guess, by that time, 25 to 30 heads of state, including Putin and including Xi. I had a 2-hour conversation with Xi, the president of China, by the way. And I've been convinced for a long time. I doubt whether most of you would agree with me, but I think we're going to. Listen closely. They're going to write about this point in history. Not about any of us in here, but about whether or not democracy can function in the 21st century. Not a joke. Whether autocracy is the answer. They were my discussions and debates I'd have in the many times I met with Xi. Then he goes on. Think about it. By the way, before I get to that, autocracy is basically roughly equal to dictatorship. Autocracy means one person has all the power. All right, let's proceed. Think about it. You know things are moving so, censor that, dang, rapidly. Things are changing so rapidly in the world in science and technology and a whole range of other issues that the question is, in a democracy such as a genius, in a democracy, I can't talk this morning, in a democracy that's such a genius as ours, can you get consensus in the time frame that can compete with autocracy? President Biden is one that, whether he realizes it or not, he likes to show his hand. He would be a terrible poker player. And in that, he is showing his hand that he does not believe that democracy can compete with autocracy. So what we have in America can't compete with China. So what would be the answer? Well, of course, his answer would be autocracy. moving to a position of one ruler instead of having to wait on decisions. And if you noticed, and Glenn Beck pointed this out last night, if you noticed throughout the speech, uh, several times, numerous times, he said things like, "Let's get it done now. Let's talk. Let's do it now. Let's not wait. It's got to be now." It's a reference to the autocracy idea. All right, let's go to Proverbs chapter 10. For those of you who have been following these lessons, you're probably thinking, well, Brother Ryan, aren't we supposed to be in chapter 7? Yes, but we're not always going to flow in the same pattern. We will get back to chapter 7, but in light of the address last night, I felt that chapter 10 is a little bit more relevant. So, grab your Bibles and turn to Proverbs chapter 10. We're going to start in verse 2. He says, "The treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death." Let's stop right there. We get one verse into this thing and whoosh, there's a lot just right there. The treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death. What are some of the treasures of wickedness that we heard talked about last night? Well, for those of us that are making under $400,000 a year, I would definitely put myself in that category. um, we're going to get, or so they say, we're going to get tax breaks. We're going to get free education, probably some kind of free health care, all this kind of stuff. We're going to get stimulus checks as much as they can shove our way. And honestly, I have mixed feelings about that. I mean, hey, an extra $1,400 here and there, it's kind of nice on the bankroll. Kind of helps pay the bills. Kind of helps with some of these things. But if you do any studying of economics and the impact of things like that, you'll know that eventually the prices are going to go up. And as people get more and more money in their pockets free, there's going to be less incentive to work. And if there's less incentive to work, then there's less production. If there's less production, then items are more on demand. If items are more on demand, they're going to cost more. You see the inflation happening. And we're already seeing a lot of companies are hiring because they can't get people to come to work. After all, why would you work if the government's giving you free money? But that's where Solomon steps in and he says, the treasures of wickedness profit nothing. Well, okay, Brother Ryan, why would that be called the treasures of wickedness? Where do you think that money's coming from? Who is funding that money? And what else is that money being used for? Abortion. That's one thing. Oppression. Oh, it's coming down the pike. All right, treasures of wickedness. You're getting money from the government, and the government is wicked right now. So if you're getting money from the government and the government is wicked, then treasures of wickedness. So treasures of wickedness profit nothing. Let's look at the contrast. But righteousness delivers from death. Now, okay, so I got some stimulus money. As a person who strives for righteousness, when we receive stimulus money, we think of how we can use it to position ourselves to be able to help other people. So I'm not going to go into that in depth because that's not the point of this message. But all these people out there who are getting stimulus checks and, shopping spree. Beware, because the treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death. Mark my words, on the path we're on, there will be famine. There will be death. There will be poverty. And if we don't start preparing now, and I'm not a doomsday prepper or anything like that, I would like in some ways to be, but I'm not one of those. But wisdom dictates that at some point the money's going to run out. Also, when the money runs out, it's going to put us a prime target for other nations to come in and raid. When the national debt exceeds over $5 trillion and we can't pay for stuff, when the American people are in a state of poverty, what do you think is going to happen when other countries hear about that? They're going to want to raid. But those of us who put our trust in the Lord, those of us who chase after God and righteousness, we can be positioned to benefit other people, to deliver from death. Verse 3, the Lord will not allow the righteous soul to famish, but he casts away the desire of the wicked. Those who are living uprightly, God's going to take care of. I mean, let's just put that in simple terms. That doesn't mean that Christians aren't going to go through hardship. Come now, let's just be real. That doesn't mean Christians aren't going to go through hardship. But that does mean that as a general principle, God will not allow the righteous person to hunger, to be in want. Now let's talk about that for just a minute. Is that talking about a prosperity gospel? Not really. You see, as we go through the book of Proverbs, there's going to be principles about money. There are going to be financial principles given. Principles about saving, principles about getting out of debt. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, we're going to see Solomon talking about what's called vanity. Vanity is chasing after things that in the end really don't profit, really don't matter. An example of vanity is spending over $1,000 a month on going out to eat. That's not going to stick around. Learn to cook. Learn to make crock pot meals. Meals that will last for a long time. And you can take a budget of $1,000 a month in going out to eat and shrink it down to maybe a couple $100 a month for cooking and still get fat. So when he's saying the Lord will not allow the righteous soul to famish, some of what he's considering as righteousness is wisdom, good money management. At the same time, he's not talking about keeping up a religious system. He's not saying, "Oh, if you keep the 10 commandments, you're never going to be poor." That's not what he's saying. But if you have a constant relationship with God, if you know God's name and God knows your name, if you're considered a friend of his and he's a friend of yours, you're going to find he'll take care of you. But he casts away the desire of the wicked. A lot of times we don't like to think of it in these terms, but when we're all out for ourselves, we're in that category. Yeah. When we're out for our own interests, we're in that category of the wicked. I forget whether it was Paul or James, but one of them, I think it was James, I'm 90% sure it was James, said that wisdom that is self-seeking is demonic. You catch that? Demonic. Wisdom that is self-seeking is demonic. We should be about the interests of other people, not about our own interests. Now let's look at verses 4 through 5 real quick, because this directly relates to last night's speech. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in summer is a wise son, but he who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. Let's put this simply, okay? So the government's wanting to give you money. The government's wanting to give you handouts. All right. Let's bring some real simple wisdom into this. If you quit your job, if you remain unemployed while there's jobs to be had, you're just relying on those stimulus checks. You're just relying on the unemployment checks. If that's you, mark my words, the money will run out. All right. He who has a slack hand becomes poor. Let's read that in layman's terms. He who lives off of unemployment will become poor. He who does not work for a living will become poor. I don't care if the government's giving you $1,400 a month or $1,400 every 2 weeks. I don't care if unemployment's giving you $600 or $900 a week. He who has a slack hand, he who does not work, will become poor. Look, the goal of this is the goal of all the stimulus money and all of this. And nobody's going to tell you this in the government, but the goal is to get you dependent upon them. And once you're dependent upon them, you become a slave to them. They have you because you can't live without their handouts. He who has a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Okay, those of us who continue to work while we receive stimulus checks, while we receive, we don't receive unemployment because we're working. But those of us who are working while we receive stimulus checks, we have the ability to make wise decisions with those decisions, as far as not going out to eat all the time, but decisions that okay, I'll give you an example. My wife and I are accumulating fruit trees for our property. We want to have rows, a whole orchard of fruit trees. Okay, so that those who are poor can actually come and get fruit. That's that much less food we have to rely on having to buy. Okay, so that's an example. We're not just taking our stimulus money and throwing it at games and throwing it at worthless things. We're actually investing that in the future. And that's wise. We're working. And it says, the hand of the diligent makes rich. He who gathers in the summer is a wise son. Okay, so he's going back to farming analogies. So let me help you out with this a little bit. All right. When it's time, when the food is ripe, It's time to gather those things in. Gather them into the barns, save them for winter. And mark my words, Biden said a long, dark winter is coming. What do you think he means by that? I promise you it's not anything good. All right. But he who sleeps in harvest is a son who causes shame. Let's put this simply. The person who gathers in the summer is the person who is preparing for hard times, preparing for times of famine, preparing for times of difficulty. But the person who sleeps during all of this harvest is a son who causes shame. That's a son that's going to be relying on everybody else. That's the son that's going to become a beggar. It's one that'll be poor and destitute. And I'm not talking about the good kind of poor. I'm not talking about being poor in spirit, which is a good kind of poor. I'm talking about a shameful poor. Wisdom says, don't just sit back and relax when everything is good. Don't just say, oh, I got my stimulus money. Let me get a big old widescreen TV. How's that big old widescreen TV going to help anybody else? Come on. Do you realize how many fruit trees you could buy with the amount of money spent on a big old widescreen TV? What about vegetables that can be planted? Solar panels. You know, the money that you spend on worthless things, what profit is that going to be for you? And in these studies, we're going to be visiting Ecclesiastes, where Solomon's going to be talking about all this. I sought pleasures all over the world. I've done it all. I've seen it all. Vanity of vanities. What profit? What good is that going to do you in a time of famine? Mark my words. In a time of famine, you will learn to hate your television. We're coming up on 40 minutes. I figured that this lesson was going to be a little bit long because of the speech last night. We'll go ahead and end it here. Um, y'all, let's continue to pray for India. Continue to, they are still in really bad shape over there. And let's be praying for our government. We need God to move. We need some things to happen. And pray for wisdom. Ask God for wisdom. We need it. All right. God bless y'all. We'll see you, hope, Lord willing, tomorrow.